Two completely different worlds. Two opposing military doctrines. On one side, American technological dominance and a bottomless budget. On the other, Iran's impenetrable geography, guerrilla tactics, and a readiness for total sacrifice. What happens when an unstoppable force meets an immovable object? Welcome to the analysis of the conflict the whole world fears today. Before we dive into the deep analysis and reveal how this war would truly unfold, here is a quick summary of what awaits you. Just take a quick look at these staggering numbers facing each other on the global chessboard. While the United States allocates an unimaginable $900 billion annually for its military, the official Iranian budget is only about $10 billion. The American ground Colossus numbers around 1.3 million active duty soldiers, while on the other side stand about 600,000 active members of the Iranian military and the Revolutionary Guard. On the ground, over 5,000 of the most advanced American Abrams tanks are pitted against Iranian armored vehicles that are technologically decades behind. In the sky, a terrifying American fleet of over 13,000 aircraft creates a devastating ratio against an Iranian air force of barely 500 planes. And finally, at sea, America's 11 nuclear supercarriers patrol against an Iranian navy that doesn't have a single carrier to its name. When you hear these numbers, the winner seems obvious, doesn't it? But how is it even possible that Iran still represents an insurmountable military obstacle for Washington? Stay with us until the end to find out. Can anyone conquer Iran? The year is 2026. The world is on the brink. The eyes of military analysts are fixed on a single point on the map, a nation that has stood for decades as the defiant fortress of the Middle East, Iran. The ultimate question arises: if diplomacy were to fail completely, who would actually win in this clash of worlds? To find the answer, we will weigh two entirely different military philosophies. Would the technological and financial supremacy of the United States be enough to break the natural fortress of the East? Budget, dollars versus innovation. Let's start where every war begins, in the vault. When we talk about money, the disproportion is so vast it defies logic. To put it into perspective, the United States allocates nearly $900 billion annually to its military. Officially, Iran's military budget is a modest $10 billion or so. But official figures here are an illusion. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard controls a massive portion of the domestic economy. And thanks to local production, what America pays $1 million for, Iran produces for a fraction of that price. The ratio is still an impressive 90-1 in Washington's favor. The psychology behind this is clear. America buys unstoppable force, but Iran buys exhaustion. It is a battle of a titanium spear against millions of wooden arrows. While American strategists rely on technology to do the job quickly and with surgical precision, Iranian minds focus on the math of saturation, making weapons so cheap that America cannot intercept them fast enough with million-dollar missiles. Ground forces and manpower. Steel versus fanaticism. Money buys equipment, but wars are ultimately won by people on the ground. And here we come to the most brutal comparison. On paper, the U.S. Army is an unstoppable colossus, roughly 1.3 million active duty personnel, equipped with over 5,000 of the world's most advanced M1A2 Abrams tanks. On the other side, Iran has about 600,000 active members, including the regular army and the elite Revolutionary Guard, with armored vehicles that are generations behind the Americans. But paper does not reflect the reality of the Middle East. The American soldier is a highly trained professional. The Iranian fighter, on the other hand, is deeply ideologically and nationally motivated. Beyond the regular army, Iran possesses the Basij militia. Although propaganda speaks of 10 million ready volunteers whose logistics alone would collapse any state. In reality, Iran wouldn't even try to create a single massive target. Instead, American armor would face hundreds of thousands of decentralized, asymmetric teams hidden in caves, armed with modern anti-tank systems. It is a collision of pure conventional power and a guerrilla mentality where losing one's life to defend the homeland is seen as the ultimate honor. Air power, stealth versus the network. But before a boot touches the ground, the war is fought in the sky. Here, the difference is most obvious. On the scales of aerial supremacy, America possesses a fleet of over 13,000 aircraft, led by fifth-generation stealth fighters and bombers like the B-2. The Iranian Air Force numbers barely 500 aircraft. Ironically, the backbone of Iranian aviation is still comprised of American F-14 Tomcats, purchased back in the 1970s. The power ratio in the sky is a staggering 26-1. However, Iranian generals harbor no such illusions. They know the sky is lost. That is why they have literally buried their tactics in the ground. Instead of planes, they have invested in layered air defense systems and underground bases carved into mountains. They don't want to beat an American pilot in a dogfight. They want to make the airspace over Iran so dangerous and unpredictable that every flight represents a risk the American public won't be willing to pay for. Navy, Colossi versus swarms. And now we come to the place where the first spark would most likely ignite: the waters of the Persian Gulf. The naval comparison looks like science fiction. The United States patrols the world's oceans with 11 nuclear-powered supercarriers. A single Nimitz-class carrier carries more combat aircraft than the entire Iranian Air Force has operational. Iran, on the other hand, has 0 aircraft carriers and a navy that can barely be called a conventional fleet. Yet the American nightmare isn't called an Iranian destroyer. It's called the Swarm. In the bottleneck of the Strait of Hormuz, American floating cities lose their open sea advantage. Iranian naval doctrine is based on hundreds of ultra-fast Zulfikar-class boats, armed with missiles and torpedoes. Of course, the Pentagon has developed responses in the form of literal combat ships, laser systems, and armed helicopters, and these ships are by no means helpless. But the Iranian math remains relentless. When 10 boats attack, it's an incident America can repel. When 200 attack at once, that is a saturation tactic that threatens to pierce even the most perfect American radar shield. Geography, the invisible commander. Finally, we come to the most important commander of any Iranian defense, the Iranian land itself. People often compare this situation to the 2003 U.S. invasion of Iraq. That is a fatal mistake. Iraq was mostly flat desert, an ideal runway for American armored divisions that covered hundreds of miles in a few days. Iran is a physical fortress. To the west rises the massive Zagros Range, a rugged chain cut by gorges where radars and satellites lose their meaning. And every pass is a perfect ambush. In the heart of the country are deserts, impenetrable zones of death where temperatures exceed 50 degrees Celsius, 122 degrees Fahrenheit. While American logistics in Iraq had highways, in Iran, they would have to supply hundreds of thousands of troops through narrow canyons and freezing mountain passes. Who emerges as the winner? So, when we draw the line under these massive differences in money, technology, and manpower, who wins? The United States would undoubtedly win a quick, limited, conventional war. American jets and cruise missiles could turn Iranian infrastructure, ports, and military bases into dust within the first 2 weeks. But a war against Iran would never end there. A ground invasion and an attempted occupation would require hundreds of thousands of soldiers and trillions of dollars. The collision of American precision with Iranian asymmetric warfare and unforgiving geography would pull America into a quicksand that would overshadow Vietnam and Afghanistan combined. Not only that, a war would instantly activate Iran's entire network across the Middle East, igniting the region and collapsing the global economy. In this chess match between a technological giant and an ancient fortress, an Iranian victory isn't measured by conquering Washington. Their victory lies in the fact that by analyzing every American move, they have managed to create a defense system whose price for any potential conqueror would be a global catastrophe. Because in the end, no matter how powerful a military machine might be, there are never any true winners in war. Behind every geostrategic game of chess and victory on paper, there are only ruined homes, lost generations, and a silence that drowns out every explosion. The greatest victory humanity can ever achieve is the one where weapons never speak. Thank you for watching this analysis all the way to the end. If you appreciate this kind of content, please support the channel by leaving a like and subscribing, and make sure to drop a comment down below. What are your thoughts on all of this, and how do you think this clash of worlds would truly end?